so much.
Thank you for having us over.
Thank you. You're very welcome. How are you?
We're to see you. Good so far.
U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the war-torn nation, Ukraine, yesterday, where he reportedly discussed how to return it to self-sufficiency in support of investments in transportation infrastructure.
Meanwhile, on Monday, Zelensky announced that he is canceling Ukraine's elections, which were scheduled to take place next spring, the end of his 5-year term, citing the ongoing war with Russia, saying it is, quote, not the right time for elections. He further added that now is the time for battle. Former Congresswoman Tulsi weighed in on Zelensky's latest move to keep elections there from taking place. Take a look.
In Ukraine, President Zelensky has already taken complete control of the media. He has outlawed his political opposition parties, and he has banned the second largest Orthodox Christian church. That wasn't enough. Now, in his latest edict, he declared that he's canceling the presidential elections altogether. Now, President Biden claims his mission is to defend democracies and defeat autocracies. But he continues to take money out of our pockets to underwrite a war of one corrupt autocracy, Ukraine, against another, Russia. So the real reason Zelensky has outlawed elections is to stop any who dare to criticize the rampant corruption in Ukraine or the war.
I mean, I just got to say, it is a little trippy to hear Tulsi Gabbard say Zelensky is bad for bombing an Orthodox church, for doing something anti-democratic like canceling elections, for infringing on the free speech of people in Ukraine, and to hear her so zealously defend Israel, who has killed dozens of journalists, who bombed an Orthodox church, who hasn't exactly been the bastion of democracy, given it's an apartheid system for Palestinians living in the country. That's neither here nor there. But it is really interesting to see. It's such an exact, almost parallel there. But to see her react so differently to those two instances is remarkable. I don't think she's wrong, however, in her critique of Zelensky.
No, canceling elections. Democrats say that there's nothing more prized than our democracy, and democracy is at stake, and that's the whole case against Donald Trump. And now we have someone who is in the political figure we're supporting, who's in the midst of a crisis and is saying there will be no votes, and has already taken the actions that Tulsi outlined there. The suspending of independent media and of the rival political party, governing in a wholly illiberal way at a time where we are trying to pretend like the fate of the liberal West, of Enlightenment values, hinges on Ukraine keeping control of the Russian-speaking part of its country. That's really what's actually at stake. It's not the existential survival of the Ukrainian people or even of Zelensky's government. It's a territorial dispute that predates this conflict. That's what Russia's pursuing. And so I tweeted last night, at the time where Zelensky was coming in for a lot of criticism from Vivek Ramaswamy, who was saying a lot of the things Tulsi just said there about we should not be funding this. This is a waste of our money. This is not going well. This is not important for U.S. foreign policy. And I agree with that. I tweeted that the war is clearly lost, that Zelensky's advisors know it. No, they're telling him that behind the scenes. The media is finally begrudgingly admitting that that is the case. That Time magazine profile, which was trying to be very flattering towards Zelensky, does concede that it's not going well. And obviously Republican, probably many Democrats as well, probably many of the American people don't think this is worth it and is going well. The people know. Everybody knows. So I tweeted that it's obviously lost. And then some people responded saying, I don't know how you can say it's lost. It's at worst, it's a stalemate. I'm like, okay, that's fair. It is a stalemate, but the conditions of the stalemate, Russia is occupying part of Ukraine, right? The stalemate, you can call it a stalemate if you want, but the situation is not going to be resolved and broken by Ukraine forcing Russia out of those territories. And Russia has said that their goal is not to take over the entire country. So I guess it's a stalemate, but it's a stalemate in the conditions that Russia wants. So when are we going to negotiate over that basic fact?
It's remarkable to look back at the propaganda that was used to justify engagement in the first place. Remember when everyone was screaming that Putin was a madman who was intent on reconstituting the USSR and conquering half of Europe?
Yes, I do remember.
Remember when the West thwarted peace agreements that were being negotiated a month out of this conflict?
David Sachs talked about that on our show, on our interview with him the other day. People should look at that. That was really good. And you've brought that up.
Yeah, but before 500,000 people died, For 500,000 people, Zelensky is now...
On both sides, war's awful.
Zelensky is now struggling to recruit more young people, conscript young people into this war, killing off all, like an entire, not an entire generation, but like all of these people in this young generation in Ukraine. For what?
Yeah.
And now they're in a worse negotiating position than they were back then. Remember when we were told, I mean, those of us who with consciences and who had, decided to look even a little bit into the roots of the conflict, wanted at that time to talk about the fact that this was a Russian-speaking region in dispute where there was some ambivalence. It's up in the air how that region, if they had self-determination, how they would vote.
The for what is the self-determination of a group of people. And obviously we don't, even from the Western liberal perspective, people don't take the view that a nation can never move its borders or reconstitute or have people break away.
And the whole point of the Minsk agreements was part of it was allowing the people in the Donbass to have self-determination and have a vote to see what kind of economic system, what kind of economic program they wanted to adopt, the Russian-leaning one or the Western-leaning one. And the reason that some people say that those accords were scuttled, that agreement was scuttled, because it seemed like it was likely that they were going to choose the Russian alignment. They didn't want that, enter Victoria Nuland in a coup. So all of that was considered to be Putin talking points. It's something that you could not say. And only now, I almost feel bad for Zelensky. When you see him stressed out, wringing his hands, begging to go to Israel so that he can have some relevance on the national stage, America made these commitments to him that they knew that they were not going to fulfill.
Yeah, that they were going to fulfill for like a year and a half.
Sometime, but not to the bitter end. Yeah. America told him that they were going to back him to the bitter end. And now he committed his countrymen's lives to this, and he's going to end up in a worse position than he would have ended up in March of 2022.
Yes. It only makes sense if you think, and maybe this was what the U.S. was thinking, well, we can just make it hurt for Russia, bleed them a little bit, no matter how many Ukrainians die in the process, and we'll do that until we don't feel like giving them any more weapons or public sentiment shifts enough that we can't afford to do it anymore, and then we'll stop doing it, and then they'll negotiate along those exact...
Russia's doing fine. The ruble is fine. Russia was able to sell its oil elsewhere, and in fact, this conflict has sparked a realignment that further weakens the United States and the dollar. So,
and the Russian opposition, the Wagner Group, they didn't go through. They weren't able to go through with whatever they were doing, and their leader was assassinated.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that one of the big sticking points of the negotiation.
I don't think it's made this situation more unstable for Vladimir Putin.
Sure. Yeah, it's worth noting that one of the big sticking points of this negotiation was whether or not Ukraine was going to join the EU. And there were people at the time that said, all you have to do is make this commitment. Russia's asking you just to make the commitment that it's not going to be a part of NATO, rather, and it'll all go away. Now we're having an interesting conversation. It was just announced yesterday that a European Union Commission is advising that Ukraine should join the EU. I don't know if that's like a compromise position, if that's going to further provoke Russia in a different sort of a way, or if this is like, fine, join the EU, just don't join NATO.
Yeah.
But it is fascinating to see that sort of discourse is still on the table. That seems to be antithetical to actually resolving this
If they join
conflict.
the EU, does that mean somebody else in the EU is going to pay for their defense instead of the U.S.?
Who wants this responsibility?
They want the U.S. to have this responsibility. Yeah. And it's time for our friends on the international stage to deal with difficult political situations that arise in their region. Yeah. They can deal with it. Not everything is our job. And that's clearly what American voters feel. They don't want to be on the hook. They don't want to be the policeman of the world. How many times can they send that political message and just have it ignored?
Also, I'm sorry, what's Pete Buttigieg doing there?
Running for mayor? I don't know.
Whew. All right, stick around.
There's no limit to what that guy can take on.
We're rising after this.